Welcome to episode 206 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I am Dave Deacon, and we got a special episode for you. It's an end of an era, the turning of a page, the beginning of a new chapter for one of the founders of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast, and we'll be getting to that announcement in the second half of the episode. Before that, we'll be talking summer crops, cover crops, and wheat across the state, and you will be able to find out more information about all of that and so much more on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. As always, let's start with a quick trip around the table for an introduction to the dream team of dirt and everything that grows from it. Well, let's start with Oklahoma State University's Extension Soil and Water Conservation Management Extension Specialist. And of course, he's the holder of the longest title on the podcast.
No, I'm sore. I haven't taken surface composite soil samples in 18 months, and I'm worn out.
Dr. Jason Warren. Across from him, we find Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist.
This gave them growers, because growers were the ones that created the treatments. It gave them a playground to do this research without having skin in the game, if you will. You know, they weren't going to lose yield if something went wrong.
Dr. Josh Lofton. And finally, at the end of the table is Oklahoma State University Extension Precision Nutrient Management Specialist.
Well, Josh, you and I are the ones that are working in realms that introduce a lot of risk. You're trying to say, okay, maybe you plant another crop you never planted before. Maybe you planted another time that at least is perceived risk. And I'm telling them, maybe you don't need 300 pounds of nitrogen that you've always seen as a risk adverse.
Dr. Brian Arnell. The doctors really do enjoy hearing from you and answering your questions. So if you have one about soil or crop production, jump over to reddirtagronomy.com and leave your question there, or send an email directly, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, and we will discuss your question on the next podcast. Let's kick things off with an update on crops across Oklahoma. One thing that we have to remember is this was recorded back on June 30th, 2023, and since we're just a little over a week past that, and much of the state has received rain, it has kind of put a standstill on agriculture production across the state. So what Brian's going to talk about still is pretty much applicable to where we are right now in Oklahoma. And with that, we hear from Oklahoma State University's Dr. Brian Arnell. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. So Brian, you've been across the state looking at wheat, all that great stuff. You actually just were at Lake Carl Blackwell doing some stuff.
Was out at Canton, then back to Lake Carl Blackwell.
Oh, okay.
So this year we've been able to harvest we had Altus up in Miami, down Chickasha, and we're waiting on one last field up on the Kansas border around Caldwell, north of Medford, where Jason's been talking about. Yeah. And I've been getting some calls. So wheat's all over the board when it comes to yield, quality, test weight, and protein. There's some pockets of really good wheat. Mm-hmm. And there's some pockets that are really close together. Had a call from Eli Parr, one of the crop consultants out there, and he just blown away by the difference of what Chickasha was cutting at 60, 70, 80 bushel. And you go 20, 30 miles away and you're 15, 30. Here at Perkins, I was cutting 75, 80 bushel. And then at Lake Carl Blackwell, which is 15 miles as the crow flies, 20, best I did was 40.
Wow.
But on the average, probably 25. And so that's why we're getting test weights from 52 to 61. We're getting proteins from 9 to 13. Mark Hodgin called saying that he was seeing just tons of variability. A lot of that variability in protein and test weight is environmental and also management. I mean, how many folks in the spring time this year had any desire to spend money on a wheat crop come March 1st?
I didn't.
Very few. Jason didn't. Our Northwest, everything in the Northwest is harvesting as much biomass in terms of pigweed, mare's tail, crabgrass as they are putting wheat in the bin.
It's green, spurting out the back.
Yeah. A lot of questions about, how do we manage the weeds before we harvest, but I think harvest is really starting to wrap up. But just be an interesting year once all the numbers come in to see where it's at.
Yeah. I'm curious how Altus ever shook out, because Amanda said that the proteins were off the chart down there.
It's because the yields were junk and the test weight was junk.
Okay.
Well, that was the one that she was cutting like 40 on Altus. The last I talked to, I think her or Tyler, they did the wet chemistry on that, and I guess the proteins came back solid.
Wow.
So that was good for them, and probably have to do a post-mortem on looking back and seeing what what happened there, because, having decent yields of, 40 in Altus is not bad for this year. And then coming in with a really nice protein, that's something to draw down on seeing what's going there.
What happened is they had a decent winter, so they got biomass that looked really good, and the high proteins came from at harvest. The end of their season really just tailed off, where they didn't get anything. So we saw a lot of shrinkage and berry size. We didn't get a lot of high test weight. Test weights weren't bad, but if you'd gone down there in November, December, you thought you were going to cut 60, 70 bushel wheat. And so it hit that plateau, and then that spring came down there, and then the heat hit, and it just started sucking backwards.
You could definitely see, because our wheat stuff that was really early, and we cut early, had a lot of shrinkage, low test weight. Yeah. We don't do the protein, but yields were nothing right home. These later planted wheats have been better. So
out at Canton, we did basically producer Clint Wilcox shut off his starter for a whole mile. We want to look at see how the starter affect yield and look for that phosphorus variability. Oh, yeah. And he's expecting, we're coming in where, of course, he wants 100 bushel where he added the starter above non-starter. He just wants that win.
Was that irrigated?
Irrigated, but it's sandhill. So there was one hill I couldn't get the combine up because it was so sandy and so steep on his circle.
Yeah,
but the plus minus there were areas where his starter made 40 bushel over the no starter. There are areas where the no starter made 25, 30 bushel over the starter.
Wow.
Why is that? If you look at the imagery, that area was greener all year long, but he couldn't keep the water. It's an area that was harder to irrigate, and so it went back quicker because it produced more biomass early and couldn't water that one region due to the soil factor and probably the irrigation system.
Yeah.
And it just went backwards.
Yeah. Because there for a while when it was real dry before it started raining out there, it would have been hard to keep up with wheat, depending on how much water you had. And in that sand, it makes it hard, so that makes sense. It'd be fun to look at that a couple years in a row on some dry land, because you'd probably see.
We had a lot of phosphorus strips in dry land in western Oklahoma. We applied them. I'll put them that way. Cheyenne Valley didn't fare too well. Alva didn't fare too well.
Oh.
So we'll try again.
You're talking about all this 40 bushel wheat. What did you get them to make out there?
It was disastered out long before we ever had an option to.
You never got the insurance man came along and took care of that one.
Yeah, the insurance man.
Yeah.
Paid that one out long before harvest ever came around.
Brutal.
So that's the wheat crop. Josh, where are we with the summer crops?
Well, overall, of course, it's also going to just depend on where you are, but I think overall, consistently across the state on what we could have expected given 3-4 months ago, I think we're in a pretty decent spot. There was a field, I'm not going to point anybody out in this room, but there was a field that we planted corn, and they said that there was a 90% chance it was going to zero out before it hit tasseling, but it's Jason, it's doing pretty good right now. But
you should look at the daily ET on that.
but
do a water balance and see where you're at.
But it's
I don't count corn until the ears are full.
It's everything's doing okay. We're still. I don't want to say we're on a water deficit, but we're still living shower to shower in a lot of places in the state, and July comes and we run out and we get consistently over 100, then things are going to fall backwards pretty quick. Also, because we have been so wet, I just went and looked at some soybeans and some sorghum, and the amount of biomass we've picked up in the last 2.5 weeks is significant. And so if we start running out of water because it doesn't rain and we didn't have deep water starting out, and then it's getting to the hundreds, it's going to be an issue, and we're going to see that happen pretty quickly. And that's something that happens a lot in Oklahoma. That's why we don't like just exponential early spring growth, because more often than not, July comes back and hits our yield back a little bit because we don't have the water to keep up with the biomass we accumulate.
Josh, all these guys mudding out wheat right now because there's still a lot of. I was almost in mud today.
Yeah,
they're crazy. Still mudding it out, and they're going to drop in double. What's the no-go date on double crop? When do they stop putting soybean, sorghum, and corn in? I know guys dropping some corn in right now.
Corn corn is just that double crop corn system, that really late planted corn. We're just starting to get going on that. That's starting to hit. All of our data in recent years have been July 4th planted or later. So anywhere from July 4th to August 1 is what we've done double crop corn on. So we've got time on that if growers want to give that one a shot. Also, again, we'll highlight that's a high risk, potentially high reward system. The sorghum and soybean is kind of where we're starting to run out of time. The best case scenario or kind of that nice date that you can stretch across the state would be about July 4, July 10 would be where I would stop double crop. If we have a late fall, we've had stuff go in through middle of July or something like that and still do pretty good. But we're starting to get to the point that soybeans want to flower after the solstice, and we're looking at the solstice in the rear view mirror, and we're going to see that fade off into the background pretty quick. So the fact is that we're going to get less and less vegetative growth, and that whole tale of germinating with a flower on that first node is going to start coming true here pretty quick the later we go.
Maturity group for beans that are going in, anything to avoid?
I mean, a lot of people run the gamut, and a lot of them believe something. We don't have any hard data on, maturity group 3s, 4s or 5s for this. Some folks like to really put in 3s this time. Some folks like to put in the 6s to force the vegetative growth. It's kind of a gamut that we don't have a whole lot of information on right now, but, the bigger thing is really going to be depending on what the fall looks like. Is what's going to tell the story on that, and we never know that when we're planting. So, a good reliable soybean that you got good experience with, and those kind of varieties are the ones that are going to push out. And if we have the time, a nice brancher is going to get you some good, because it'll kind of fall behind on putting on flowers and stuff like that. So it could wait till August or September to start doing what it needs to do.
How's stuff looking up in the northeast, Josh? I haven't been up there in a while.
Twist.
It's
at
curling.
least Miami, Ottawa County, they're catching a couple rains they need, but they need more. They're starting to twist, and it is, when Josh said living kind of day by day, that shallow, heavy clay, it's really living day by day. And if you go further, like I was in St. Louis Monday, Tuesday, you get up that country, and it really starts looking rough.
Yeah.
So Miami, Ottawa County, they're on that corner of that whole dry spell.
Yeah, you don't have to get much south of that, and things are looking pretty good. All of our stuff in Bixby is living the dream. Just because it's caught everything, and those kind of places around that area are just catching those things. And you're right, up in that like really really northeast corner, it's been to a degree dry for a little bit. And so it's, especially as temperatures go up, it's going to be one of those things that it's going to need to catch some things. But there's some good fields and bad fields up there, and just depending on where you are. That's as opposed to some of the other places. Dave, when we used to talk a lot, it was mile marker by mile marker in western Oklahoma. Yep. And I think western Oklahoma, there's a broader sense of good moisture across. Now that mile marker by mile marker's up there in that northeast corner. It really just depends on where you are and how many of those little showers you've got.
Well, and that variability that you're talking about, I mean, you could really see it in the wheat crop this year, and those that had the crop and those that struggled with it. And I mean, in my mind, in years past, it's been like bands of rain coming through, and everybody gets their equalness. And this year, it's been like, here, have some over here, you have some over here, more spotty than what we've had in years past. So
well, and we've got some areas of the state we're dealing with problems of them being super saturated for so long that, like some of the sorghum and stuff like that, those low areas are spreading in the field, and those yellow areas to where they've been sitting underwater or super saturated conditions for a while have been, exacerbated, especially with the hot temperatures and stuff like that, those always just kind of go together. If you get really saturated soils, low oxygen soils, maybe water standing, and then you get really hot conditions that really can make those issues get worse pretty quick. So
I remember a couple of years ago you showed me a soybean that drowned, a soybean plant, and I never really thought about it that way, but
you saved it? You pulled it out of the ground and saved it?
Yeah, by taking a disc to it, tilling it, and then replanting it, saved it. We saved the acre, not the plant.
Oh.
And that's why you're a doctor, because you can go out and save soybean plants, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, the bigger thing we're working on with a lot of the state right now is the weed problem, and I think even that's up in the Northeast too, because the sporadic rainfall or the excessive rainfall, those are really challenging on weed management situations. And I think those are the two conditions we're at, is that it's either gotten a lot of rain and things have broke, and now we're starting, June 30th, starting to lose a lot of chemistries for even our double crop systems that maybe aren't even in the ground yet. And then you get those sporadic rainfalls to where maybe the herbicide activates, the weeds are already germinated, and the plants are just now germinating kind of all at the same time. And that's really challenging to ask an herbicide to really do a whole lot with that. Is a lot to ask for it.
Well, and it seems like the seed bank in a lot of these fields is, and of course, I mean, you don't get it sprayed and it's a disaster most everywhere, but like last year, it's so dry, you would spray something and the weeds were hardened off to the drought, but they could survive and make a few million seeds or whatever they do. And now it's just been a real battle. I love the rain, but you go through a couple years of drought, and then the rain comes, and it's a battle.
And it's even
every time.
It's even the system that we just get remembered on how in some fields our weed seed bank is so high, because we had fields last year that we carried through the drought with irrigation, and the weeds, like you said, never came on. Really weren't a big issue in those fields. Well, those fields have now been saturated all year long. And you just get shocked on how much weed seed is in that seed bank, and it's difficult to control, especially like you said, if we contributed to it in the last couple of years. It just gets worse and worse as we go.
Yep.
How are we with the cover crops? I know you've been doing studies on cover crops in multiple locations across the state. What are you finding?
Well, I mean, and it's the same as the crops. We had a nice little demo that was supposed to go out in eastern Oklahoma. The growers did everything they could do, but the inconsistent moisture mean that it never came up. Where stuff over here looks great, and so it's a tricky system this year. The one thing we are seeing in a lot of our plots is that we've seen some years to where cover crops, as far as a weed management tool, is very successful. This is not one of those years. Just the amount of weeds coming through is again, it's a lot to ask a cover crop system to hold back as many weeds as we've had coming. Now, we have, where the cover crops are, maybe less weeds, but it's still well above that threshold of acceptable for a cash crop. So while there's less, once you get above that unacceptable range, it doesn't matter if you're just above it or if you're really above it, you're still going to have to use an herbicide. You're still going to have to go make a rescue application and do that kind of thing. So they have not been successful at doing some of the things that they've been, that we've seen in the last couple of years, but then our spring planted covers going into potential grazing systems in the summer, they're looking outstanding. So, I mean, it really just depends on where you are in your cover crop system, what your intent for it is and stuff. So these cover crop systems where we're hoping to get good grazing capacity, good carbon, good something like that, and they're spring or summer planted, they're doing great in the same areas we have crops that are doing good. The Northeast is still one of those systems that we're seeing a challenge, even in cover crops, that it's kind of being a challenge to get anything out of it.
Yep.
Now, with the 100-degree weather that we've had here recently, are we going to get into prussic acid issues and grazing
nitrates and stuff
nitrates
like that.
And such?
I mean, I don't think we're quite there. 3 or 4 days of 100 degrees is all within the terms of acceptability. I mean, and in areas that have had a significant amount of forage sorghum, they've also been areas that have been pretty good on moisture. So we aren't getting those hot and dry conditions. So, and then a lot of the stuff, especially out far west, it's just now going in. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of it just now starting to roll in. So we're not quite there yet. And then next week supposed to be in the, depending on where you are in the state, the 80s and the 90s again. So a nice summer week to have for a lot of our crops that are starting to flower and starting to pollinate and starting to really go reproductive. It's good to have nighttime temperatures in the low 70s and the high 60s again. That'll help a lot.
Yeah.
So, Jason, you want to introduce your guest? He's been patiently waiting over there.
Yeah, we have
nice and quiet, and just taking notes and
soaking it all up,
in,
learning the process.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
We have Randy Taylor, our neighborhood engineer.
Neighborhood engineer.
Yeah,
that's nice. I'm getting a sign made. Sit it out in front of my shop.
Yeah.
Well, if one of Lofton's students hears this, you'll have one on your office door Monday. I can almost guarantee it now.
Well, it'll be a week or so before I see it.
It is the holiday season. Yeah. So, of course, Dr. Randy Taylor with Oklahoma State University, and I guess just give the listeners a bio. Tell them about yourself.
Oh, I guess I'm an ag engineer by training from Oklahoma State. Back when the Magruder plots were over on campus, maybe not quite that long ago, but I didn't help move them, so I wasn't here then. But then I spent some time up at Kansas State. I always tell people the first Bill Snyder years I was in Manhattan from '89 to '05, and have been back in Oklahoma, since then in a couple different roles. But just a kind of an ag machinery specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Been back on faculty for not quite a year right now, working on some different machines and working. We'll hopefully have some plots out with Josh here pretty soon with some oriented corn seed, if we can get our devices working like we want.
Right.
It's not a trivial task planting a corn seed in a specific orientation, but we think we're pretty close to being able to do that.
With being an ag engineer, I mean it is that specific science to be able to make different things work, and it's more than just going, well, let's add that to the round baler and see what we can do. I mean, you're actually taking it a step further.
Well, I think for me, and you think about ag engineering, it's the ag part of it
right.
is the big part, and the ability to work with agronomists and ag economists and the different disciplines that we have in agriculture, and saying, Josh and I were just talking about staging crops, and I'm going, I can't stage crops, but I don't have to because I have you.
Right. Right.
Not that he's a consultant, but it's like I have that expertise. I don't have to. It's like when you look at things we were talking about, where like farmers, well, they need to be able to stage crops. They also need to be able to work on their equipment. They need to know. So you have computers. So all these other things they have to have. They've got to be about pretty shallow in a very broad area, as opposed to we get to specialize.
Right. Right.
And so, but the ag engineering part to me is just the engineering and working in agriculture.
Yeah. Excuse me. Thank you. I first worked with you on the shop stop segments, and every time I learned something, every shoot. I mean, it wasn't every episode, but I mean, we'd shoot like 4 or 5 episodes in one setting. And every time I would learn something from at least one of them, and I'd go, "Wow!" So
me too.
Do you remember how to straighten a square?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, because I can go to YouTube and watch him do it.
I remember that. I don't know why I remember that episode. I was like, oh, that's pretty good.
For me, it was kind of amazing because Wayne is just so sharp.
Yeah.
and he's also very, very witty, as you know, because you worked with him. And he had a lot of stuff you couldn't put on the air.
My favorite was "Damn it, Dave." Every time we would shoot to go, "Damn it, Dave."
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing we never broke into our point counterpoint for Saturday Night Live. But no, it's I think working with Wayne is like if you watch Tim the Tool Nantucket, Wayne was Tim and Al,
right?
And I was just there.
Were you Heidi? Is that what you're saying?
You can't say that.
I just did.
Well, it was great because you guys had that chemistry, but you brought information to it too. And I'm still trying to remember how you can, if you have a dual axle trailer and one of your wheels, or if you blow a tire, you can shimmy the other one around. I remember that shoot, and I watched you guys do that, and my brain's like grinding gears trying to figure out how that actually worked. And I know it's not rocket science.
No, I've done that before with a boat trailer on the side of a highway.
Yeah.
When you blow a bearing out, and it's like, okay, I can either sit here with semis blowing by, or I can find something to shove in this shackle to keep the spring up. But but no, there's little things like that. And I noticed today when your mower tie down was, I drove by and I'm like, I bet he learned that on shop
Yes,
stop.
he did. Yes, he did.
That mower chain. I mean, it's like a half-inch chain on a little light riding lawnmower. I'm thinking, is this a paddle scraper he's hauling, or is this a zero-turn mower?
And it's funny because I did the looping the chain down and then hooking on the outside because I learned that on shop stop.
Yep.
Yeah. It's the little things on there that keep it from rubbing and falling off eventually too. So you've been with OSU, I'm not even going to try the math. That'd be 18 years, I guess.
2005. I mean, added up, subtracted.
That's what I was trying to do, but
try not to. Yeah.
I was hoping one of the other guys would go, what is this number? But yeah, so I mean, you grew up in Eastern Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tahlequah. Okay. And then you came to OSU just because it was scholarship.
They say that there's a lot of 18-year-olds that know what they want to do.
Yeah.
And some of them are even right.
Yeah. I had to mute my mic on that one.
That was a good old belly laugh.
They've heard my story. They've heard they've heard my story. That's why I laughed.
So no, I'm the first generation in my family to go to college.
Yeah.
And it seems like I just kept going I kept going. But it's like, I don't know, I got good grades in high school, so it's like, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to go to college.
Yeah.
And so I did. And then I ended up coming up here. I did 1 year at Northeastern prep school.
Yeah.
Somebody the other day said, oh, it's like, what was that, 13th grade? I'm going, that's what we called it.
Yeah.
And so nothing against Northeastern. I mean, it's a great school, but it was
your local school.
Yeah,
and,
living at home.
Yep.
And doing that, and then came up here, and my first class up here was Calc 1, and there's about 200 people in the auditorium in Engineering North, and I'm just looking around. The first thing pops in my head is, I bet he don't take roll.
Yeah, they don't care if you show up to that class because they won't. You could come back to that class if you don't show up,
it's
or you might get to go home.
It's like going, hey, keep paying your tuition, buy it again.
Better enrollment scores for me. I don't know if that's true,
but no. So I just came to school up here, and really, this is where I really, I think, got involved. I grew up in Eastern Oklahoma, which is more pastures and cow-calf operations. And so go up here and really developed a passion for crop production, working with folks. Some of the folks from, Jim Stigler from agronomy and some of those folks like that. Just a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And so what's been some of the projects that you've worked on in your tenure here at OSU?
Well, a lot of stuff on planter performance. Mm-hmm. We've done some stuff both in the lab as well as in the field. A lot of sensor-based stuff when I first came here. We had Dr. Ron and Soley and Stone. We're all well entrenched in the green seeker sensor stuff, and so I was just driving by out here, Brian. that culture applicator that we're putting ramps out with.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to find that control box, because I think that would fit into the other project that you were talking about, trying to do something like that.
I found a ramp applicator control box out in an educator's barn.
Oh, did you?
The entire trailer applicator box.
Okay. So that's it. Let's not get an Arduino or anything really new. Let's get an old PLC that's 18 years old and try to use that, because we know how to use it. But doing some stuff, we did a lot of nitrogen strips on wheat fields all over western Oklahoma with the agronomy, plant soil science department, and then county educators. Learned how to do some agent training. I just really like the way that group approached the Green Seeker training, and for our educators specifically, because it was focused. It's like not everyone came.
Yeah.
The area agronomist said, okay, here's my 4 or 5 people. I want them to come, and it was a 2-day training, and they left with tools and the skills to use them.
Yeah.
And then next year, different. A different crop would come.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to learn from that crew.
I want to go sideways, because one of the things that has always interested me about Randy's background is being early on the CARTA project up in Kansas, that producer-driven research program, which is still going today and kind of self-operating. So can you give just a little bit about what that is?
So it's CARTA is the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association. When we first started, it was CARA, Kansas Ag Research Association. It was modeled after a group up in Idaho or Montana. I can't remember exactly, but it's just a group of producers that's been coming to our Precision Ag Conference. They're really focused on doing on-farm research and learning more themselves. I spent at that Info Ag this week just talking to Eric Lund, and we were laughing about. We had a regression workshop for farmers. They came in and we taught them how to do regression in Excel, and it really made me laugh, because Eric and I were laughing that when Bill Ron presented at one of our meetings one time, he showed a graph with a line on it, and the R squared on the line was something like 0.25, certainly not real high. And somebody called him out. They're going, you're saying these things match, and you got an R squared. This is a farmer calling him out on his R squared in a meeting. And Bill looks at him and goes, but the slope is significant.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wait a minute. We're at stats 2.0 now. But just really, I think, helping, and I think really what most of the farmers got out of that the session and all the time that we spent with them at that was that if you really want to do research, it's not easy. It's not splitting a field in half.
Right.
And you don't go at it and say, well, I'm not really committed to this, because you end up with weeds in it or something else. And now you've put some effort in that you just wasted because you didn't put enough effort in. And there's folks that get that now a lot more than probably I think did before.
And from that standpoint, like you say, I mean, the producers becoming more educated, and that helps more than anything. If you know why things are happening on your farm, then you can work on it. To me, there's always a little bit of that when you think about it. Most successful companies have a budget for research and development. Right.
And so if I want to be on my own farm and I want to be successful, then what are the things that I need to be doing? And I'm not saying turn your whole farm into a research farm, but it's like, where's the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah.
And what are the things that you need to be looking at that you can look at? And we have the tools to do that.
Yeah.
With yield monitors, planter controllers, and some things like that. So, learn, because there's just really no way that we have the resources at a land-grant university anymore to do all the research that needs to be done. and all the specific questions. It's not like, Brian, you didn't get the glory days when you're deciding, do I put nitrogen on my wheat or do I not?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then it gets to, well, how much should I put on? And now it's into that, well, how much should I put on following cotton in a no-till environment on sandy loam soils?
Yeah.
You know, so it's everything. It's just really the questions are getting more and more specific, and that's why I told the
you
group.
Said InfoAg, we're the fine tuner now.
Yeah, we've adjusted the course adjustment. We're working on and maybe there's something that's going to come along that's going to be that 20-30% yield. Not betting on it, but I've been wrong a lot.
So you asked the group. So we were both at InfoAg, and Randy was in a panel session about technologies that did or did not succeed, or why.
What the panel session did or did not succeed, or the
it had some of the best engineers in the U.S. on that panel, so I don't want to go with that.
So it
one.
probably did succeed.
But you asked the crowd, and they didn't really answer. You had to question the crowd. Do you want increasing yields with increasing variability? And I thought you were going to go down a little bit further road on that question, or you just leave it out there kind of stew?
I don't have the answer to that. Mm-hmm. The question was, is it okay to raise the mean, and we talk about yield, or we can talk about profitability, or whatever. Is it okay to raise the mean if the standard deviation also increases?
Good question.
Because usually we're really, and I thought the one kid on the second row had a really good answer. He's an economist. He goes, it depends on how you feel about risk.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But in general, we don't like a lot of risk. And that's a challenge, I think, that we have, all of us as extension specialists. When we look at producers, are we really trying to help them succeed, or are we trying to keep them from failing?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
If I'm going to keep them from failing, the best thing I can do is reduce the standard deviation, even though it may cost me a lower average over time.
Well, I think that's, as extension, I think you have to judge, get that personal relationship with each individual, because I don't think there's a blanket statement that can be made across.
Yeah.
I think it's, there's some growers that are, trying soybeans for the first time. So I'm gonna talk to them about practices about, reducing risk.
Mm-hmm. And that's important.
And that's important because
First
they don't want to fail,
critical.
the first several years. But if I'm talking to a grower that's grown soybeans for 20 or 30 years, we're going to talk about bumping, because they know how to not fail. They've obviously not failed for,
they've not failed enough to succeed.
Yeah, they've not failed enough.
That makes sense.
But, so I think that's but it's a good point. But I think, my time in Louisiana was a lot different than my time here, because my time here, a lot more growers are looking for that stability.
Yeah.
But, in the South, where it got a lot of rain and that was not a limiting factor, it was, hey, our cost of inputs are so high, I need to bump yield indifferent of the risk I put in front of myself, because the market doesn't allow me to do it the other way.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, as you said, the important part at the very first, and that's the personal relationships. Know who you're talking to, and what their risk level is. I worked with one of the best agronomists, present company excluded, in my entire career, but he was so conservative that there was no way he was going to help you swing for the fence. He was going to be on the backside of that, because it's like there's not going to be a chance of failure, and so I think it's knowing that individual, and again, someone going to be there.
And if you don't, it's like I've told a lot of growers that I worked with, your number one priority before we discuss all that is, where do you want to see your farm in 5 years or in 10 years? That farm management plan is very important, because can you handle risk? Can you handle a year risk that potentially your crop could go to under suitable value to try to be successful, to try to make that 300 bushel corn?
Well, Josh, you and I are the ones that are working in realms that introduce a lot of risk. You're trying to say, okay, maybe you plant another crop you never planted before. Maybe you planted another time that at least is perceived risk. And I'm telling them, maybe you don't need 300 pounds of nitrogen that you've always seen as a risk adverse. I mean, and so there's a lot of stuff that we do inherently that is, whether it is perceived or real, there's a lot of risk involved in changing a practice and make some of the extension we do. Jason, you too. I mean, implementation of no-till.
Yeah.
Well, my neighbor failed.
Well, we're going to help you succeed.
We're going to help you succeed.
Well, and it's also it's funny because it's also perceived risk, because if you were to tell a corn grower in the Panhandle or Western Oklahoma, hey, let's try 14,000. Oh, okay, that's not too far off. I went and took that information to the East Coast, and they thought I was crazy because they're planting 35,000. There's like no way you can make those yields with 14,000 corn. And
Well,
I'm like, that's just, it's a perceived risk because it's what you do and it's what you know.
Well, and like that's a great example, because when I started here in 2008, I was out here in LCB, and I may have told this story, but I was out there and had 24,000 seeds in the ground on corn at the Lake Carl Blackwell west of town. And we're walking through this corn. We got corn ears about 3 inches long, and your predecessor said, "Oh man, this corn looks good." And I just come out of Kentucky, and I mean, we're growing 250 bushel corn in Kentucky, and a good year, and 200 in a bad year, and I'm like, ugh. And then then we went into the drought, and by that time, the 2011-12 drought, and by that time I'd been irrigating corn and milo for a few years out in the Panhandle. We were dropping 17,000 on low water irrigation and 32,000 in full water, and it was a straight line every year. You'd get a straight line, yield versus water, more yield, and we were limited water in the full water too, because we were trying to be conservative. But that made me think is, the population's got a lot of flex in it. It may have been the hybrid, we can all argue with Seed Man or whoever, but the water availability in our environment's critical. And so when you think about managing crops and dropping the population, and so then you fast forward a few years, and a grower started calling me. We're in the drought, and it's brutal because he's spending all this money trying to grow this corn at $25,000, and that's like $80 a freaking acre in seed. And I said, until it starts raining, I'd drop the population as low as you feel comfortable dropping. And so he started dropping it down about 15,000, 17,000. And then, of course, it started raining, but he was still growing 100 bushel corn. And you're going to grow 100 bushel corn in central Oklahoma. You might get 150, and we may be working. And that's the fun thing, is as you develop that success from a change like that, and then you might be able to start increasing the population, playing with it based on rainfall forecasts and what you think you got in the ground. But you can have transformational change that really goes against the conventional wisdom sometimes, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking.
Did that with nitrogen. I mean, if we look at it, when I started in 08, even when I was a grad student earlier, the tradition in wheat was all up front. I mean, I remember Bill and Gordon talking about, let's give them to a 50-50 split. That was a big thing Gordon Johnson was working at. Let's get to a 50-50 split.
That'll be the big
that
win.
would be a huge win. And now more and more of the wheat producers put on a starter, and they don't even look back until November, December, January before they're even thinking about their first real shot of nitrogen. But 20 years ago, it was, God, can we get them to cut it in half up front?
Yeah.
We're taking a quick break so the doctors can go back and watch their favorite Shop Stop episodes and show Randy their best Wayne Kiner impression. And while they do, I want to remind you to hit the subscribe button where you get your podcasts. And if you want to learn more about what the doctors are talking about, jump over to reddirtagronomy.com for all of that information and a place to submit questions for them. It's always fun to hear from you guys, and the doctors love hearing your questions too. Of course, that's reddirtagronomy.com. Now let's dive back in with some big news about one of the hosts of the podcast that was made official just last week. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast.
We can, because I'd like to know a little bit about his
Okay.
How's he going to screw up my career?
I'm not gonna. Hopefully I'll be helpful. My goal is to be helpful.
Do no harm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a better goal than being helpful. Hopeful's kind of that's a moonshot. Do no harm is achievable.
Yeah. Speaking from experience, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So, thank you. Yeah. This is potentially your final podcast with us too.
Yeah.
Just a hard right turn into this right here. We're not going to ease into it.
I got a new job.
Got a new business card.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about your new business card.
Well, I'll start off by saying my current job title is the Soil and Water Conservation Extension, or Soil and Water Conservation Management and damn it. I even forget it. It's the Soil and Water Conservation Management Extension Specialist, and I'm also the co-coordinator of the Sustainable Ag Research and Extension Professional Development Program. That's my title right now.
Wow.
And then Monday, my title will be the Assistant Director of Agriculture and Natural Resources and Community Economic Development.
Ooh.
So I don't get a shorter title. I get almost longer.
Well, it turns from and to just one big title. I mean, before it was like you had two titles, and now it's one large one.
Yes.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Well, I get to work with the leadership and extension to try to facilitate program development. There were like 10 things on the job description when I looked at it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's a lot. And I really, at the first time I looked at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that. And then I got an interview, and I'm like, oh man, that's a lot. And so there's a lot of things that I'll be involved with, from simple, reviewing fact sheets to helping faculty and extension staff develop educational plans, programmatic plans to evaluate how they're impacting the world.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
That's awesome.
And I haven't even started, and I've started going to meetings, and I'm learning faster than I've learned since I was a freshman.
Right.
So yeah.
I didn't learn very fast when I was a freshman. Sophomore year, I picked up the pace.
Right.
Well, I had to learn when I was a freshman. I was going to fail.
So what will happen with all of your science experiments that you have across the state, all the research?
Well, right now the great thing is, and I hate to do it to my students because I have awesome students, but my students are very, very good.
Yeah.
And they kind of know what they're doing, but they'll be moved to other faculty like Josh and Sumit Sharma and I don't know about Arnold. I don't think you're getting one, but they'll be moved to other faculty, and I'm hopeful that I'll be at least there to provide them guidance on some of the details, because there's really, like the greenhouse gas stuff, we've got a civil engineering engineer over in the civil engineering department. She's an environmental engineer. She's an expert in that, so she's agreed to help mentor one of them. So I tell them, I think you're probably better taken care of by these people than you are me. So, and I don't know if that's true. I think it is, but it'll be kind of disseminated, and hopefully it'll continue forward. And then I'm hopeful that we'll be able to. They say they're going to backfill my position, so we'll get another person in here to do something similar to what I do.
Will you be making as many trips to the Panhandle, or are you going to have those long days up in Ava anymore?
I don't think so. I've got some trips on my calendar because I've got to make sure that there's certain things that are taken care of, and that my people know how to do.
Yeah.
They haven't been fully trained, but they may not be. I don't know. I probably won't make as many, and I hate to say that because I love going out there. And when I do, they won't be near as long. Yeah. Because the last 8-10 years, I've taken many a 5-day trip out there.
Well, you don't want to just go back and forth. You want to make sure you get it all done.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's a different perspective because I've always thought that we have tremendous people in Extension.
Yes.
And I don't always get to work with all of them because I'm focused on what I do. And now with this position, I get to learn and understand more about what everybody in ag and natural resources and community economic development, and I'm passionate about all that, and I know that most people are very passionate to do extension work, and so I'm excited to learn more about it.
That's great.
So Jay, what's the one, because you're giving up the science, at least for the time being, so in the last, since you've been either a postdoc or scientist, what's that one cool thing, maybe not huge impact, but that one cool thing that's come across your desk that you were a part of?
Oh, I don't know. Man, you got to give me these questions. I got to be prepared for a question like that. There's been
like we give any of our guests a chance to prepare.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been so fun. Like when I came back to Oklahoma, I went to Virginia in 2001, and I came back to Oklahoma, and it was a different world. And from a conservation specialist standpoint, I had an awesome team of people that were very interested in developing these no-till management systems, and it's been great ever since. Everything from here west was wheat, except for southwest, and it was cotton. And then you had some corn and milo under irrigation, the Panhandle. And now you see crops of all different types and farmers that are willing to experiment. I mean, I had a call from a farmer yesterday wanting to grow some sun hemp for forage, and I was like, well, we don't need to talk about this. But, I mean, they're so willing to participate in the process of learning, and that's what's, in general, been awesome about this job. And that's what I'll miss being, like, right in the thick of it as a specialist. And I don't know how they I don't know how long I'll be getting farmer phone calls, because, like, the guy called me on sun hemp because I have a fact sheet on sun hemp. And so maybe I'll get to do a little bit of that still, but I don't know.
Randy, did you keep? I mean, because part of the reason you're here is that he's taken over that position that you came back to be an extension specialist from. So, did you get to keep those calls?
I thought it was because I was the neighborhood engineer.
Well, you are, and whether you know it, your face will be on Red Dirt Agronomy forever now.
Yes.
So.
Well, I've got a face for radio. It tapers off. It's there because you've built the reputation. And it goes back to the relationships. You build a relationship with the people. They trust what you have to say. They know who you are, and so they're going to call you. And so the big key is, I think, is knowing when, because you want to help them. That's the extension thing. But if we hire a replacement position, then it's a matter of, hey, thanks for calling. You need to talk to, let me give you so-and-so's number, whoever's brought in to do soil and water conservation type work. So it's a matter of transitioning them. And seeing, the big thing is we've always been focused on our own success as faculty. That's our deal. It's like, okay, because that's how we get graded, right, is if we're successful. And now you're in a deal where your success is really based off of how successful everyone else is.
Yeah, that's why I see it.
And so that's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, it's like Summit Sharma. He and I, we've worked together for a long time. He's an irrigation monster. And he's learned, and he's like really, I mean, he's very, very, very good. And we've got that part of the irrigation program taken care of with him. And then, in a couple weeks, we'll have an irrigation engineer back on staff. And so they can work together. We've got economists that work with them to do all these things. And so like that I'm not worried about that. And then now we just need to find someone good to take care of all this soil health and greenhouse gas emission stuff and I don't know, just general conservation that I've done for so long. And the good thing is like when I started, there weren't very many conservation extension specialists. There were maybe 3 in the entire country that would have my title, and over the last 10 years they don't call them what they call me. I think they mostly call them like soil health experts and all that kind of stuff, but it's the same thing. So we'll have a good pool of people to come in and do what I do.
But you think about specifically western Oklahoma, and even we can go north central Oklahoma, and we can even come down to Payne and Noble County if we want. Back in the 80s, after wheat harvest, it was drop a match and get a plow out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
not that way anymore.
No, and so there's so much has been. So now, okay, what's that? How did what's that next level? And that's where I think where we've got to that. Someone else coming in, they're going to obviously have a different approach than you've taken. How much different? I don't know. It's the same concept that we're going to try to stop doing as much tillage as we can, and try to grow crops as often as possible. And you got guys that help with that.
Yeah, that's what's been so awesome. Is it? It's one thing. A conservationist is really easy because all you have to say, well, don't plow.
Stop.
If you want to stop erosion, don't plow.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always enjoyed about this job and the mentors I've had in my life is that I know that's not going to work. You have to figure out how to grow a crop without plowing. Mm-hmm. And now, and so it's the same as if you want to grow a crop without conventional chemical fertilizer. You now someday you'll have to fertilize that, and because you're removing, and you can't just keep taking from the soil. Yeah. And there's people out there that might tell you different, but I've never seen a system where you can mine it and not give back a little, because that's mining. That's what mining is. So that's what's been so awesome, is that I've always had a good group of people that were interested in what we do, in trying to conserve the resources of Oklahoma, and the soil and the water, and reduce, runoff and off-site contamination and all that kind of stuff, because we do have an impact. But we've seen gross reductions in the impact of agriculture in the state of Oklahoma in the last 20 years, and I had some part in it, but I can't take all the credit. And now what's fun is the cultural change. You talk to a guy in western Oklahoma where it's drier than dry could be, and they don't want the wind to blow their ground away, and they realize how that can be achieved to minimize that, and they're willing to do it, even if it's going to cost them more money sometimes, because they just don't want to see it because it's freaking awful.
I want to go back to Brian's question, because little did you know you're actually the guest on the podcast.
Yeah,
I think me and Brian have heard more than a couple of times that you've forgotten more about soil and soil conservation and soil chemistry than me and him will ever know. Well, I think that's just a component of it. But to me, I've never seen Jason Warren light up more than when he talks about irrigation. Yeah. Like, irrigation, to me, since I've been here, has been like your baby.
Yeah.
So far that the first trip I ever took when I was an extension specialist was with Jason Warren to the Panhandle. And we're out at a steakhouse, and Warren's got his laptop looking at ET and soil, water, sitting in a bar, just sitting there going, oh, but if you look at this is what's really going on out there. And I think that bringing that taps down for corn originally, and then I tell you what, the passion of Jason Warren doesn't come out as much as the presentation I heard you give on cotton taps a couple years ago. Just talking about irrigating
that's an
cotton
awesome project. I've been irrigating crops in the Panhandle a little bit at a time since 2009 was the first trip I went out there to fire up the drip system. And we, at that time at that station, we were growing about 140 bushel corn, and we were growing 150 bushel milo. That's how upside down that world was. And it was because we weren't watering the corn enough. And then we started learning, we started talking to farmers, because I was not trained as an irrigation person. That was in my job description. That's kind of like my new job description. There's a million things in my old job, in my faculty job description, and I'm proud to say I've done a little bit of all of them. But the irrigation's the one that I've developed the greatest passion because it's so important. And but we brought that yield up to 225, and now we're tapping 300 on corn, 150 bushel milo, 4-bale cotton. And what we're trying to do is try to minimize the water demand minimize the water consumption without falling off the yield curve, because we don't want to do that. And that's a scary, scary thing, because if you think nitrogen management is a scary thing, you go out and try to tell a farmer to stop a pivot for 5 days before he fires it back up so he can save that inch of water for the next year. And you, because it's not, a 10 bushel yield loss. We had the first year we did taps, and I won't name his name because he's a good friend of mine. But the guy that told me, or the guy that motivated me to do taps was a participant. And because he said you didn't need 22 inches of water to grow corn. And I said, I'll prove it to you. And it took 2 years, and I got it done, and we started doing it. And his first taps yield, and taps is a project where farmers tell me how much water they want, hybrid and all this stuff. But he grew 86 bushel corn that year. And the top end was 250, 260, and probably a good yield was 230 or something. And so we learn real quick when that happens, because that's a catastrophe, and you never want anybody to do that. But you've seen the other participants that are in the panhandle start shaving water and start trying to play the game and start getting closer to the shoulder of that yield curve instead of way out on the side where they're pumping 30 inches. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's been wonderful to see. And then the cotton stuff, there's always been guys growing cotton out there. You go into Guyman, and every year there's at least cotton field, but now they're trying it more and more, especially in Beaver County, because they can grow as much value to their farm and actually per inch of water make more gross revenue. I don't know about the net, but the gross, because the net's a little tricky, but they can gross out more per inch of water with the cotton. And then they're also less sensitive to the irrigation like corn. I mean, if you're deficit, like right now, they're living the dream today. I checked the weather, or the temperature today, and it's 100 degrees in southwest Oklahoma. It was 95 degrees in Miami, and it was 78 degrees in Goodwill. And that's unheard of. I mean, we're going to the 4th of July weekend, but if it's 110 degrees out there and that pivot goes down, you got to fire it back up. Whereas with cotton, it could wait a day. You know what I mean? So it's I love working out there because those guys are so productive, and they're so understandably serious about what they do, but they also have a limited resource. And so we're trying to help them extend the life of that deal.
Well, and I think the most interesting thing about that was, like Taylor was talking about, is the on-farm stuff. This gave them growers, because growers were the ones that created the treatments. It gave them a playground to do this research without having skin in the game, if you will.
Yeah.
They weren't going to lose yield if something went wrong. They could risk. They could do that risk without having a financial stake in it, other than just the time associated with working with you on the project. And they could roll that dice and say, hey, I've always wanted to see what 50% water reduction on corn would do. And if it did, all it took was Jason just saying your name was a horrible corn yield this year. But some years it was the best thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
So
I really, and we're working on some stuff. Summit's involved on trying to develop some funding for that. And it's aggravating because you have these great things, and people say, oh, that's all good. But no, it's hard to find a funding agency sometimes to fund stuff. And it's very frustrating because I think that mode of engagement with people is awesome. Like when I started doing that, I got to know so many other farmers that I didn't know before, and because they would hear about it and they'd say, I want to do it. And then we'd get together and they'd walk through that corn and start saying, is that your corn? And I was like, yeah, it's my corn. and you just develop a great relationship and an understanding that we're just trying to figure out how to do things better. And like you say, it gives them an experimental unit within a large 60-acre field that they can try things with, whether it's technology like genetics, or if it's soil probes, or anytime anybody wants to test something, they can put it in there and they can use it. They get their service provider to put it in there, and we've looked at aerial imagery, plant stem growth deals, and soil moisture sensors, and I don't know that we ever had crop canopy temperature sensors in there, but we could. I mean, you can do anything you want, because if a farmer brought something to me that they wanted to test on that and then compare it to other farmers management or my base function management, because I've got a bunch of fixed treatments out there, you could do it. And it takes kind of the burden off, like what Randy's talking about. It's complicated to eliminate all the variables when you do on-farm research and then manage it, but we do it for them. And I've always thought I'd really love to see it in wheat and milo and dryland both, and I've had people suggest we do that, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm not. I used to be able to make it rain with grants, but I guess I've got to where I'm not very good at writing grants anymore.
One day we'll have wheat. That's one, I think.
Yeah.
So the bigger thing to think about really is as an educational tool, because that's the business that we're in, is educating folks. And it's always fascinated me that you're using competition as an educational tool.
Yeah.
And because they look at each other, and it's like, ooh, I got smoked last year. What were the decisions that I made? And so the fascinating thing is okay, how do you take that and transfer it to livestock, to a cow-calf operation? To, can we do something like that on one of our stations where we are raising cattle? It's going, okay, hey, you got 10 cows, no Brahmans. We don't want any floppy ears out now. But it's so I think that's really is the thing is because that's what they learn from.
Yeah.
Because they're watching each other.
Yeah.
Really close.
Yeah. Well, and then what another component from a research perspective, and Josh and I talked about this yesterday, is the sociology of changing mindset on management practices. And like what goes through their mind when they see what we've done and like the results of it, and then how they go back to their farm and make adjustments. Like, it takes a lot of water to grow corn, and we can shave some off a lot of people. And with the design of that, it's not perfect for this purpose. But if you pick the right hybrid, that also makes a tremendous difference. Water and hybrid are the two main components of a production system that dictates yield, which then then drives profit or at least gross. And then some years like this year with the very highly dynamic market that we've got going on, beans are up 70 cents today, and then corn's down 40. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, when you got dynamic markets, then you get into a situation because they can also market this corn because we're looking at profitability of the system. So then over multiple years with that, you can start to understand what factors within a management system influence gross return, and those are the ones. It's marketing, hybrid selection, and then long term, I think you're going to see more water. And certainly short term, you can't short it water, but when we start, and I've got some good economic people on campus that I'll give all this data to, and they'll look at short-term profit, and then they'll look at long-term profit. And so maybe these guys pumping 30 inches are making all the money now, but they're going to be out of water potentially sooner than later. And so then they won't be able to extend that aquifer, and then now we can have that discussion. And then you look at nitrogen. Brian's over here. Poor Brian. I mean, nitrogen doesn't seem to have a bit to do with profit. Like when we do all the analysis to look at, and I'm not saying don't go out there. You got to fertilize because if you don't fertilize to make the grain and you pump 25 inches of water out there, then you've just wasted 25 inches of water that is very precious. And that's the way I see it.
But your corn probably doesn't need to be blue.
No. And I mean, we've had guys, put out 300, 400 pounds of nitrogen just to see what it would do, and it didn't do very good. Yeah. I mean, but we can say if you're putting out 300 pounds, just start doing like what you're saying with the on-farm stuff. You've got a variable rate rig. Just go there and drop the rate, and then you don't have to do it on the whole field, but just then keep an eye on that, and you've got the technology to not just look at this year's impact of dropping the rate, but then you can look at multiple years, and then you can keep an eye, because these soils that we deal with, they're heavy groover clay loams, and so they hold a mountain of water when they're full, and they hold a mountain of nitrogen, and they'll hold it for a really long time. So and so it's different from one soil to the other, but it's fun. That's when I got a lot of good stuff that I've got to do, but that's one of the best ones. So yeah, you teased that out of me, Josh.
There you go.
So I'll be that guy then. But so in your new role, because I I did that for almost 7 years.
Yeah.
And so you're not interviewing.
7 years?
Damone and I were talking about. Yeah, I was shocked to think that you'd done that for 8 years or 7 years.
7 years.
Because it just seems like yesterday you started doing it.
Yeah.
And
It's kind of like
what?
dog years.
Yeah.
So technically it was 1 year.
No, it was 49. It depends on which one is which. So you're not interviewing anymore, so you don't have to show a vision or hide a vision. If we're sitting, because we talk about, and you and I spend a lot of time talking about the way tillage systems have changed in Oklahoma, and neither one of us caused that to happen. I think we were both playing in that space, so we contributed.
We helped people,
and
but we didn't make it happen.
So if you think about extension, and we'll leave the community and economic development off to the side, but just from an ag and natural resources standpoint, 7-8 years from now, what would you like to see happen?
I would like in crop production, and again, I've got to learn a lot about all the other components. I would like to see, us being more productive with less impact on the environment, and because there's two winners in that. There's everybody in town wins in that, and then growers win from that, and it's gonna be it's always a heavy lift. Like everything's always changing in agriculture. That's why I love extension, because we may not know all the answers and have perfect answers, and we may not be, we make mistakes like everybody else, as we develop an understanding of the system and how it changes. But we have a lot of, like with resistant weeds, and then some of the, limitations that could potentially happen in the future with herbicides. And I'm very concerned about, the reversion back to heavy tillage. And I think we can do work now to help prevent that later. You know what I mean? And so those kinds of things, that's why, we have people on the ground in every county that are asking, or, we ask to answer questions every day from anyone that walks in their office, from a farmer with 20,000 acres to someone with a 5 acre or a 5 by 5 foot garden, and
a snake in a box.
Yeah, a snake in a box or a hole in a potted plant. Shout out to Jackson. And so we've got so many layers, and and so you want to support those county folks to achieve what they're trying to do, and to put out the fires that they're constant. You ever talk to a county educator and ask them what kind of questions people ask them? I don't pity them for needing to know so much. They know so much about so many things. Yeah. And then you've got the area people who know a lot about a more narrow subject, and then you've got the state specialists that are focused lasers on big issues that they see coming down the line. And so I just hope that we can continue to provide that kind of service and be able to answer questions today, but then also look ahead and try to figure out what needs to be dealt with for tomorrow. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So at InfoAg had a guy come up, a Purdue guy, because of Lusk coming on as dean. He's a big Purdue guy, so he's excited. But he was bringing up that, and he was asking Lusk about this also, is that especially in other areas and kind of in ours, the universities are seen as being too late on things. We're no longer the go-to that we once are because we're slow or behind or things.
That's the nature of the process. Part of that is the nature of the process.
So I don't disagree, but how do you position extension? How do you look at that 10 years down the road to make sure that we're not to the point where we're obsolete, that extension is still, the go-to for unbiased?
Look at what you guys done. You did this week. You're doing it. You're going to these meetings and having discussions with all the experts of the world on precision ag, right? Mm-hmm. That we have to have state specialists continue to do that, and we have to have thought. And the beauty, this is what I love about being an extension specialist. You get to work in two worlds. You get to work in the academic research world, and then you get to work in the real world, and there's a big difference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever engage like, and we have awesome researchers at OSU, freaking monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's unreal sometimes when I hear some of this kind of stuff that people can do, but they don't spend their time running around all over the state, and there's value to that running around all over the state, so that you understand what people are dealing with, and you can take that back to the researchers and work on some of the longer term things. And then you also get engaged, like what kind of technologies. I mean, we have to have the whole system. The whole system works because of the way it's built. Is that you've got faculty that have extension appointments going out and learning at these conferences what the top of the pile is on the research stuff, that understand what people are actually doing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I mean, we could talk about reorganizing that whole system, but I think that system, as long as you have people in place that understand the roles of everyone in it, I think we can really do a lot of awesome stuff to keep up. And you know, there's things sometimes you can't always see coming, like industrial hemp, for instance. You know, there was a period of time that everybody was super excited about industrial hemp, and I had a very long term cooperator farmer. I call him my friend. He got a little aggravated with me because I said we need just a little time to figure some of this out, because you know, you can't grow it here yesterday, and now you can, and we may not invest a lot of effort into it because there's no market for 1 million acres of industrial hemp, and you can guarantee if they're going to grow something big tonnage, it's inconsistently on a new crop like that, Oklahoma can grow it. We can grow anything. What we know is we can grow anything in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. But the question is can we grow it well enough to compete where someone else is going? And so there's a lot to go into that before you just dive off with $10 million worth of effort to try to figure that out. And so there's always, I think there's always need to evaluate those kinds of things, but then evaluation takes time. It's just like, you know, and with Sustainable Ag Research and Extension, I work with people that, I mean, they're trying to do all kinds of stuff because they have all these ideas about what they want to do and how they want to do it. And they say, well, why doesn't anybody do research on this? And I was like, because there's probably 20 acres of this in the entire state, and you're the only one. What we can do for you is we can provide you all the tools and the general plant and soil science or horticulture to best investigate what you want to do and try to figure it out. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But we can't spend $200,000 a year or how much ever it costs for a dedicated research project. But we have the ability to help you increase your probability of success. Does that make sense? Yep. And it's tough. It's tough because so many people want to do so many things.
I mean, that's something, Brian, I think that we've heard for so long. I mean, I started as an extension assistant in '85. And so we talk about, extension's the best kept secret. Yeah. Guess what? Still is. You know, and so, you know, we talk about, well, extension's always a little bit behind. Well, it's not really. There's some places where we're actually ahead, but it may be that one area that should we be at the forefront of autonomous vehicles? Probably not, because someone else is doing all that development work. Should we be in the mix of the application of autonomous vehicles? I'd say, yeah, we should. And you know, so there's different things in there. The other one that you'll always hear is, what are we going to do? The farmers just keep getting older. Yeah. The age of the farmer is, and I go, guess what? We were talking about that in 1980. Yeah. And so, and are they older today? Yeah, they are. Not the same ones, but the average is the average is going up, but not as fast as what someone would think. No.
Yeah.
And so,
well, and the thing is, Randy, and you know, like soil moisture sensors, they've been around forever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A land grant university faculty because for when they were being developed, there was no market because they were very challenging to use. But the science in those were developed in land grants.
Yeah.
And then that science, right after this, in 2007, when the iPhone came out and you started getting all these smartphone technologies, that's when that irrigation management technology became doable, because you didn't have to walk out into a field and manually observe the moisture content of the soil. You could do it on your phone. And it's tragic because some irrigation people think they wasted their whole lives, but they didn't. They developed it, brought it to market. It was not ready for market because it was not something that farmers could do, because the farmers have so many things to do. You can't add one more thing. And so, but now they're commonplace. And so it's now our role to help people understand how to use them and understand how to, communicate with them. And so it is what it is. But
well, and I also think there's a point to institutions have knowledge that goes back. Yeah. Right. And I'll put a caveat onto this because I love working in them, and I think there's more work to be done. But when cover crops first made the return, universities didn't jump on it like the private industry did, because we went back and said, hey, in the 80s, we've done this.
Yeah, that's what...
We've got all this data that it didn't work doing these situations here. We've already got the data. Yeah. And like I said, we've now fashioned it into something new, and we have new questions and new things need to be asked. But just this general blanket statement of, oh, well, we've just developed cover crops to go on. No, you haven't. This is a very old technology. This has been here for a while. And so I feel like sometimes we get caught into this, that we have institutional knowledge, and sometimes people don't like to see it applied because they see it's from the 80s, and that, things are different, and things are a little bit different. You talk about hybrid differences and irrigation. Now we're growing soybeans out, 5 counties from Colorado, 2 counties from Colorado sometimes, and it is a little bit different, but I think people don't like to remember that institutions have that knowledge that goes back so far, and we sometimes don't jump on things because we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars looking at it already.
Well, it even when I first started this job, I would go to a conservation tillage conference every year, and it was a group of guys that were long in the tooth. And not
unlike this situation.
Yeah, no, well, but these guys had started working on no-till in the Southeast in the 1970s, and actually that project was probably started in the 60s. And Jim Stigler, my predecessor, who, I don't know, remember when he retired, 2000, probably 5 or so. But he had been doing this for 30 years, and so you can do the math on that. And they had been working on no-till cropping systems forever, and it kind of took hold a little bit in the South. But then when glyphosate came on, they were able to actually accomplish some success, and then there were just limitations. But they were doing this stuff a long time ago. It just wasn't always ready for market.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But anyway,
I was telling somebody the other day that as an undergrad, I hauled a planter out to the Panhandle for Jim Stigler.
Yeah.
On the low-till project. It's all this the low-till project. If you see those signs around. But so they were looking at no-till out there in the dryland cropping systems, and at the time, diesel fuel was 65 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
And Roundup was $100 a gallon.
Yeah.
It's tough to make no-till work.
The math didn't work on that. Yeah, and so that's why I say they developed a process that was successful, but it wasn't ready for market.
Yeah.
Because the market would not allow it.
Yeah.
But you look at where the early adopters of no-till in Oklahoma were, large acreages of multiple farmers doing it, was in the Panhandle.
Yep.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you'd like to join in on the next discussion, Send us an email, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. We sure do appreciate the season and a half of the Red Dirt Agronomy podcast that we got to share with Dr. Jason Warren, and we wish him all of the best in his new role at Oklahoma State University. We would also like to thank Dr. Randy Taylor for joining us on this podcast today. To find out more about Dr. Taylor or any of our guests, along with any of the resources that we may have talked about today on the podcast, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you'll find show notes, and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Jason Warren, Dr. Brian Annell, and the not a doctor, but I've been known to act like one on a podcast, I'm Dave Deacon. And we want to thank you for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Agnow Media, LLC 2023. And yes, all rights are reserved.